Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today, I was going to talk about analysis of the full moon or Purnima that's coming up July 21st, 2024. Again, this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology. And it seemed like the kind of theme for this moment in time is leading with heart and spirit. So let's take a look. Note beforehand, all the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. If you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. So especially for these sorts of interpretive talks, I incorporate a lot of different concepts. And all my videos I slot into playlists so that they're easy to find for more info. So, if there's a planet that you want to learn more about, or a house, or yoga, which is a planetary combination, I have playlists for all of those different facets of astrology. So, you can look those up. If you'd like to learn astrology by looking at birth charts, I published a Birth Chart Archive List 2024 video where I list all the famous birth charts that I've analyzed on the channel. And these can be birth charts of famous people or famous places or famous moments in time. And in that video, they have a list of the videos you can find the different charts in because they're usually not one-off videos. Like, for example, my monthly videos, I tend to go through about 3 famous birth charts every month. But you wouldn't know from the title that there are famous birth charts in that video. So anyway, if you're looking for those, hopefully that video helps you find what you're looking for. Other videos to watch with this one or before this one to get more out of this talk. So North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do cover Western style charts in that video as well. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. Introduction to the constellations or rashis. Constellation or rashi categories. Planetary aspects. Natural, benefic, and malefic planets. Chidra grahas or planets of vulnerability. Planetary exaltation, debilitation, or uccha, nicca. Bhavat, bhavam, house of the house, the concept of planet retrogression or vakri, karako, bhava, nashaya, or planet breaking house, nakshatras or lunar mansions, and then we have some yoga, parivartana yoga, called sarpa yoga, saraswati yoga, and then I would look at the lugna video, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, or first house. All right, so lots to learn. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart for this moment in time of the full moon Purnima on July 21st, 2024. This chart is set for 6:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone I live in. And, again, to get some background here, for this moment in time, other energies giving a foundation for this chart. So the day lord is sun, and the hora lord is also sun. So the hora lord is the hour lord. So we've already got double sun here. And sun can symbolize many things, including soul, leadership, and general health. So, it's a big one. And actually, in Jyotish astrology, the sun is considered to be the center of astrology because when we look at other types of conditions of planets, for example, retrogression or, what do I say, like combustion or that sort of thing, new moon, full moon, those are all based on how much light is being reflected from the sun on the other planets typically. So, this is pretty central already in terms of, again, whether it's soul or whether it's health or physical thing or a spiritual thing. Now the Dasha period, that's the planetary period, is sun, so we get sun again. So hello, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And then we get Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury. Okay, now sun is a very fiery planet. It's a very active planet. You like the personification of sun is like the king or the president, that kind of position, like a central key authoritative figure. And then, sort of the opposite of that is Saturn. Saturn can represent things like employees, and Saturn can represent things like instead of like bringing light and energy to situations to help them grow and develop. Saturn is sort of the opposite in a way. Saturn can represent things like difficulties, delays, obstacles, chronic disease, death, even sometimes. So, there are two opposing energies. And then we have Jupiter and Mercury. Jupiter and Mercury are the two planets that symbolize communication, especially oral communication, but can be written communication as well. And these are the two planets that symbolize things like media and also learning. Okay, so if we put those energies together, there can be like difficulty with communication of the spirit or soul potentially. Then this Dasha period is switching from Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury to Sun, Mercury, Mercury on August 17th. So we've got a few weeks here. And then what I was saying here with this energy is, again, we have the Sun, but the Mercury is related to especially the rational or logical mind, decision making, that sort of thing, planning, that part of the mind. And the thing is that if you look in this chart, Mercury's in the second house here. If you look at the upper left corner, and directly opposite to it is this massive Saturn that's in its own sign of Aquarius, or Kumbha in Sanskrit, as it's known, which gives it strength. And that line under Saturn represents retrogression. So we have a retrograde swa in Vedic astrology we use to mean a planet in its own sign or a planet in its own star. So we have two layers of primary strength for Saturn. So this massive Saturn, which again represents things like obstacles and delays, is on Mercury. Okay. So I would interpret this already without looking further into the chart that there's going to be some major change in thought process. Not only because Mercury represents like the logical, analytical, planning mind, but Saturn is an Aquarius, and Aquarius is a fixed air sign, or stira vayu, call it in Sanskrit. And any kind of fixed sign means that it's hard to budge. It's very static. It's very solid, sometimes so solid it's hard to change. So people usually, when they have like a fixed rising sign, there's somebody who has a hard time. They may be very solid and it's very easy to predict their behavior because they don't change too much or they're very reliable. Typically, but it might also mean that they have a hard time changing when need be. They have a hard time being flexible sometimes or adaptable. So, and then we have this massive Saturn, which represents structure and antiquity, even in Aquarius. So it's a very strong, like almost like a traditional conservative thought process potentially here, especially because this Saturn, massive Saturn, is in the 8th house of deep psychology. But the other thing is that this massive Saturn is on Mercury. And both of those planets can represent also like kind of a separatist type energy for different reasons, though. Mercury can be a separatist planet because someone, if they're too much in their head, too much in their mind, then they're kind of a little bit detached from their feelings and emotions typically. And it might be hard for them to connect with people. Saturn is kind of a separatist planet for different reasons. Saturn can be more of like a physical separation, like somebody who kind of keeps themselves or is reserved. They might have a lot going on internally, mentally, emotionally, but they might be slow to act or slow to get involved or, again, keep their distance. And sometimes Saturn, too, can represent things like anxiety, skepticism, depression. And so, especially when we have this massive Saturn on Mercury, and this Dasha period includes Saturn and Mercury, I would assume that this means some great change in thought process. The other thing I didn't mention is that Saturn happens to be in a nakshatra or lunar mansion. And lunar mansions, there are 27 of them. Every night the moon goes into a different lunar mansion. So by the end of about 27 nights, you get a lunar month. And Saturn happens to be in a nakshatra called Purva Bhadrapada, which is symbolized by the front legs of a funeral pyre. So, smoke and transformation and the breaking down literally of self, at least the physical self. So we have this sort of combustion energy associated with Saturn, which is already kind of like a slow steamroller. Sometimes if you watch those like Bugs Bunny cartoons, where the steamroller is just slowly going down the road and then kind of, flattens like a pancake. Some cartoon characters, I keep those sorts of things come to my mind when I see this kind of energy. Slowly but surely, Saturn is steamrolling old, antiquated ideas here. And that can be, quite disturbing, frankly. Because again, if somebody has relied on a certain thought process for years, decades, their whole life potentially, then when you change that paradigm, it causes uncertainty because it takes a while for people potentially to adapt to a new paradigm. If the old paradigm is, dying away or falling away. The other thing is that this Purva Bhadrapada lunar mansion, nakshatra, another symbol for it is a two-faced person. And so again, it's kind of like there can be this kind of dual nature to that nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada. So especially when we have two faces or two heads or two minds, and we have this massive, retrograde Saturn in its own sign aspecting Mercury, and pretty soon, actually, in a week or two, a couple weeks here, Mercury's going to go retrograde as well. Then we're going to have kind of head to head this, kind of steamrolling of old ideas and kind of a breakdown of previous thought paradigms on Mercury. And that may cause confusion, that may cause anxiety, that may cause skepticism, that may be a, one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. Because especially when Mercury goes retrograde, and if you're sensitive to Mercury energy, like if Mercury's really important in your chart or prominent in your chart, or you happen to be running Mercury as a dasha, like I am, frankly, like I've already from the beginning of this month, been feeling the Mercury retrograde energy. If you're sensitive to the shadows, pre-shadow and post-shadow of Mercury retrograde, I think Mercury's going retrograde August 5th. But don't quote me on that. So, already I've been seeing signs of Mercury retrogression. So when Mercury goes retrograde and Saturn goes retrograde, they're both going to be reaching back into the past. So already we're having, several layers of confluence here about like, releasing old ideas and old thought paradigms. The other thing is that Mercury, where Saturn is in Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra at this time, this moment in time of the full moon, Mercury is in a nakshatra called Magha. And Magha also indicates, antiquity to some degree, because Magha is symbolized by a throne. So again, we have this kind of leadership, king, royalty type energy, because we've already got the sun going 3 times here. But Mercury in Magha is Regulus, the star of Regulus, which is part of the lion in the Leo constellation or Simha. Yeah. And in Indian culture, Magha is seen to be, or thought to be, the place in the sky where ancestors live. So we're not just talking about antiquity in terms of like buildings and structures, which could potentially be, but we're also looking at like what sort of thought paradigms have we inherited from our ancestors, and how can we potentially shift those cycles and break some of those chains if those thought paradigms are not really serving anymore. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going here. Now, even though we've been talking about, so far mostly about mind and soul and that sort of thing, what's also important in this chart is we look at the Lagna nakshatra. So the Lagna is the rising sign, first house, um, ascendant, all different names for the same thing, which is the top diamond in the middle there. It happens to have a 4 in the bottom corner. That 4 represents the 4th constellation or zodiac sign of Cancer or Karka. And the Lagna is important because it really sets the tone for the whole chart. So the Lagna nakshatra is in Pushya, and Pushya is represented by a cow's udder. So there's a lot of like emotional nurturance and stability with this nakshatra. It's a very lovely nakshatra. It's thought to be one of the nicest ones. Um, And then, so we've got emotional stability here, which is great because that will help potentially with these deep thought process changes that are going on. The other thing is that the moon nakshatra is an Uttarashada. Uttarashada is symbolized by an elephant's tusk. So there's this usually kind of sharp, piercing, powerful victory or kind of sudden success that comes about. So this already, what we're looking at, without going into all the other details, is that there's some deep thought process shifts going here. It's actually like, but there's success here and there's emotional stability. I would potentially even say that, like, because the sun is in the lugna, so that soul leadership energy is in the lugna. That means that if this was a person's chart, they would be the leader. The other thing is that the moon, this full moon, very strong moon, is aspecting into its own sign of Cancer in the lugna. It's going to bring a lot of emotions here. So already between those two planets, we're getting leadership of emotions and mind, because moon represents especially the mind, but like a more comprehensive emotional mind versus Mercury, which is more the logical, analytical mind. In addition to that, we have Venus in the lugna. Now, Venus and Moon are the two emotional planets, and Venus is a sign representing things like social grace and sociability, loved ones, that sort of thing. So you can see with the two emotional planets with the Sun, this is emotional leadership through breaking down of old thought paradigms. So it might be because there's such a strong, Mercury-Saturn connection here. This person, again, if this was a person, um, has, I would say, a very strong mind, a very like a mind with a lot of endurance. And you can see also in the second house, Mercury, where Mercury is, Mars is also aspecting from the 11th house. So if you have both Saturn and Mars on Mercury, when I've said before, when you get Saturn and Mars together, you typically get somebody who's like an athlete or somebody like an engineer type person or workaholic even, because Mars is a fiery planet and it kind of gets things going. It's an initiative planet. And then Saturn provides the endurance or perseverance. So, and the second house represents like oral communication. So, what's interesting is that you have this contrast and duality again, another kind of duality where clearly this person is a very emotional person, because of this moon and Venus and the lugna with Sun. But then the mind and the communication is very engineer-like, which doesn't mean that like an engineer can't be emotional, but um, they're kind of two different ways of expressing, you know. There can be this very internal emotionality, which seems to be the case here. The way that somebody expresses, they would probably be very technical in the way that they speak, and that may not demonstrate all the emotions that the person has within them. Yeah, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, again, not to get, and then again, we have Mercury and Saturn in the eighth house, so another house related to psychology. And then we have the Saturn and Mars along with Jupiter, so we get the Saturn Mars combination again in the fifth house of intellect. So you can see with the oral communication and then the intellect and the deep psychology, we're getting more of this kind of engineering type energy, which is again is a strong contrast to the lugna of the two emotional planets. And the thing is, Cancer already has that duality, even though it's not considered a dual sign, because Cancer is a movable water sign. Movable meaning like a lot of action, movement, and water being like emotional. So Cancerian Lugna people, ascendant people, they tend to be quite emotional, but they also tend to have a very strong intellect. And especially we can see here, not only is Saturn and Jupiter in the fifth house of intellect, but Mars is aspecting into its own sign, Scorpio. So, this is, again, if this is a person's chart, this would be a pretty sharp cookie here. Yeah. And so with Cancerian people, sometimes like they get a bit confused because they do have a sharp intellect, but they're also emotional. But when push comes to shove, they usually side with the emotional side of themselves. And this seems to be the case here in terms of it looks like what's burgeoning forward is this like leadership through emotions and heart and spirit as old thought process and paradigms sort of crumble away. That's what I'm seeing here. And there's success in this, which is nice. So even though it's, again, a little bit of a precarious process, it's not always easy to, shift deep paradigms. But, ultimately, if they're, more useful, you know, that's a good thing. So a little bit more context before we get into each of the houses here. The context for this day from Indian culture is that it's considered Purnima. So Guru is a teacher. So this is a day where people typically honor their teachers in various ways. And the thing is that, there's also not just sort of a guru, like somebody outside of yourself, like your fifth grade teacher, your math teacher, or something like that. I mean, or a yoga teacher, those are all teachers, and gurus of different kind. But each of us also has what we call a upaguru, so a sort of a higher guru or higher self, which is what leads the way. And guru also means like leading the way through the darkness with light. So anybody who sort of shows you the way forward is considered a guru, even if they're not like a formal teacher, so to speak. And so hard, and it's interesting context here is Guru Purnima, because again, I think what I'm seeing in this chart is that this is somebody whose inner light is shining in terms of their emotions and feelings and spirit and soul. And that's what they're leading with. Hence the theme for this moment in time. All right, so let's go through house by house and see what we see. So if we start at the top in the lagna, we have a Cancer, a karaka lagna, movable water sign, so a lot of emotions churning here. We have Sun and Pushya. We have the lagna and Pushya, so again, a lot of emotional stability. Venus is an Aslesha nakshatra. Aslesha is symbolized by a snake. And so there can be different kinds of energy here. Usually with Venus and Aslesha, this can mean like a partner who is quite attractive, typically. Sometimes, depending on what other planets are around there, it could be like if you have malefic planets, it could be somebody who's attractive, but maybe, kind of sucks you into negative cycles, or negative spaces because they're mesmerizing and they're hard to let go of because they are mesmerizing. But the attractiveness might be more surface level, and then they lead you down a negative path. But because we have Pushya here, a sun in Pushya, and we have the Lugna in Pushya, I would say this is more of a partner who provides, is not only attractive, but is provides emotional stability. And we have Moon here, and Moon is an Uttara, again, this kind of piercing victory. So this is a pretty nice alignment for, again, if this is a person, this is somebody who is providing a lot of, emotional stability and leadership through emotions and is quite successful at it and quite attractive, frankly, because of it. And whether that's a physical attraction or, because again, the lugna can represent physicality, but it also represents personality. So, yeah, so probably most people would be pretty happy with that kind of combination. So what are we seeing here? Leading with emotions, possibly more of like it's kind of a balanced vibe, I think, here because Sun is more of a masculine, considered more of a masculine energy planet. The Venus and Moon are the two of the more feminine energy planets. So there's some balance here with male and female energy. Stability, nurturance, mesmerizing, but also strength because Moon is aspecting its own sign of Cancer. So, so that's going to be helpful for the native. The Lugnatia, so the ruling planet for the chart, is the full moon. And again, that's gone to the seventh house of, one, it's a Kamasthana. So Kamasthana is a house of enjoyment. But the seventh house also represents partnership, like a spouse or spouse-like partner. It can also represent independent business or business partners. The seventh house also represents kind of like how somebody finds their way through life. So we have this moon at Uttara, so piercing victory. And then we have the sun aspecting it, and we have Venus aspecting it. We also have Jupiter aspecting it. So we have the two great benefics aspecting this moon and Uttara with the sun. Um, and then again, sun can be represented as spirit. Jupiter can be represented as soul. Sun can be represented as soul. Jupiter can be represented as spirit. Venus and moon as heart and mind. So you've got all the major kind of layers of a person in the seventh house of finding their way through life. And the way that this particular kind of person that find their way through life is mostly through feeling their way, mostly through being in their heart and their spirit. And that's how they navigate their way, even though they have this like strong, um, mindset and kind of engineering mindset and kind of this person may not talk a lot because we have this massive Saturn on Mercury, but there's Mars there as well. Um, so this person might think and talk a lot of nuts and bolts and technical type stuff, but ultimately, the way that they're moving through life and succeeding in life is through their feeling nature. Mm. Let's see. So yeah, so this lugnation, the seventh house, the Jupiter that's aspecting the seventh house, Jupiter's debilitated in Capricorn, which is in the seventh house. So Jupiter isn't as strong, but still, it's nice that it's Jupiter. It's a benefic. Um, so that may also represents, though, because Jupiter can represent clarity. There may not, so even in times of where there's less clarity, this sort of person would feel their way through life. The other thing is Jupiter does represent intuition, and Moon does as well. So we have a strong Moon here. So this is going to be somebody who's very intuitive. So again, even if they walk and talk like an engineer, walk and talk and think like an engineer, there's this deep, intuitive, emotional part of them that's actually creating their real success, I would say, especially regarding like partnerships and finding their way through life, finding their true path. So if we look at this sudden success, internal clarity of emotions, but no communication. Okay, so the new communication is this massive Saturn on Mercury. Um, this because again, Saturn can represent things like obstacles and delays, and Mercury's a communication planet. So this might be somebody who doesn't actually talk that much. The other thing is in the third house, which represents non-oral communication. We have Ketu there and Hasta, and Ketu can represent like a separationist or kind of explosive, detouring type energy. It's the south nodes of the moon. And Jupiter's aspecting there. And Jupiter represents world communication, but it's not super strong where it's coming from, originating from the 11th house. It's also not super strong in Virgo, which is in the third house. And we have Ketu there. So there can be like kind of um, haphazard or intermittent communication, nonverbal communication. So again, I'm not seeing a ton of communication here, except maybe potentially when somebody goes into a group because we have Jupiter with Mars in the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society. So when this it seems like this sort of person can kind of turn it on and turn it off. For the most part, they're not a super talkative person, but they can kind of go extrovert, so to speak, when they're in certain social circumstances. Um, but because the moon, the ruling planet of the chart, has gone to the seventh house, that's a lot of sort of direction and focus for either this person or this moment in time. So, so there may not be a lot of clarity of emotions, or at least there's growing clarity of emotions. There may not be much communication, but there's like a wanting or desire to improve relationships. And the wanting or desiring is coming from this Jupiter in the 11th house, because 11th house can represent those things. And then this could apply to like a spouse or spouse-like partnership or business partnerships or independent business. If this was a business, like maybe somebody was trying to set this thing up, um, the business would be like emotional, it would be a passion project. probably dealing with the public or women or arts, creativity, fashion, because Venus and Moon represent those things. And this could even mean, just go the other way, where the energy is in because the moon is reflecting back into the first house. This could even mean like shifting public self or image, like even maybe the way you dress, um, to fit your more authentic self. And again, leading with heart and soul. Yeah. So also in this chart, we have several yogas. We have a Kala Sarpa yoga. So that's where the planets, most of the planets are on the one side of the Rahu Ketu axis because Rahu and Ketu are always 180 degrees apart, which we have here. Saturn and Moon are not on the same side. But as I mentioned, Saturn's so slow and Moon is so fast that I don't usually consider those when I'm looking for Kala Sarpa yoga pattern. We also have here what's a Shubhaveshi yoga. So Shubhaveshi is a solar yoga. I have a video on those. Mercury is considered a benefic planet when we consider yogas, not always in a natal birth chart, but when we consider yogas, it's considered a benefic. And since it's in the second house from the sun, not just the second house of this chart, but second house from the sun, the benefic energy of Mercury is going to support the sun. And so we get a Shubhaveshi yoga, which can indicate things like people who associate with positive-minded people who have uh, who are attractive, physically attractive, which I would already get from Venus in Aslesha, somebody who probably is a bit of a heartthrob, frankly. um, and the moon is also aspecting there, so this is probably somebody who has quite a nice face, um, if not body. Potentially. And then again, we have this benefic planet of Mercury in the second house. Again, benefic as far as yogas is concerned, not the natal chart. So, in the second house represents the body from the neck up. So, again, we're looking at an attractive face and potentially voice, although you do have the two malefics of Mars and Saturn on Mercury. Um, so, that might actually indicate like an injury to above the neck, to the face, head, that sort of thing. Um, Yeah, so what else? So we have the Kala Sarpa Yoga, Shubhaveshi Yoga. So the chidra grahas are the planets of vulnerability. So you can kind of think of those planets representing parts of somebody's life that have a thorn in their side or Achilles heel, kind of a vulnerable spot. So the chidra grahas for this chart are Saturn, Venus, Mercury, and Sun. So Saturn, again, for this person, is deep psychology. It also represents antiquity and tradition, potentially. Venus is a spouse or relationships. Mercury is friends, communication. Sun is father, potentially, or soul. And we're running here Saturn, Mercury, and Sun as part of the Dasha period. We're not running Venus, but we're running 3 of the 4 grahas. So I would say that this is a difficult moment, a kind of a jarring moment, maybe painful moment for the person because they're running 3 out of the 4 chitras. Then, if we're looking at money, the yogi planet, the graha, is Saturn. So Saturn can represent wealth, and it's kind of nice that this massive Saturn is aspecting into the second house of assets. And also because we have Saturn and Mars aspecting into the second house, Saturn and Mars are bhumi karakas, so they're planets that represent property. And so I would assume with this kind of chart, this person has assets related to, land or property. It looks like they're making some money from it. Now, Moon is both Abhi Yogi, which can symbolize dearth, and it's also the duplicate yogi. So the Moon is kind of a cyclic planet anyway, because it moves so fast. And then you can see like there are going to be cycles of wealth and dearth potentially for this person because Moon is the Lugnatia, right, the ruling planet of the chart, and also the Moon is aspecting that. So looks like some of the wealth this person derives of, they may go through despite the wealth that Saturn brings, that there would still be probably cycles of wealth in a person's life. Okay, so then if we move on to the second house, the second lord is Sun. Again in Pushya, Mercury's are in Magha. It's aspected by this massive Saturn. We have Mars here. So there can again be like difficulty and leading, like maybe public speaking potentially, or talk. This is about like constructing a message. So when this person talks, when you see this sort of configuration, this is somebody who, when they talk, they're going to be very pragmatic and practical and thoughtful, and they're going to think ahead before they open their mouth. They're going to really think about and construct their answer before they talk. There can also be like kind of a mixed energy, not only Saturn and kind of a mixed dual sign of Purva Bhadrapada, but Mars is also in a dual nakshatra of Krittika. So Krittika is symbolized by Kartikeya, the commander-in-chief of the celestial army. There's also this sense of fostering there in Krittika because Kartikeya is raised by several foster mothers. So Mercury is a dual sign, and Saturn is bringing this kind of dualness from Purva Bhadrapada, and Mars is bringing this dualness. So, again, this person, when they talk, they're going to be quite logical and thoughtful in their response, but it may be hard to know exactly what this person's going to talk about because sometimes they'll be in this kind of fighting energy and sometimes they'll be in this kind of nurturing energy. So, yeah, I would say so. And the other thing is that, since this person, not only do we have Saturn, this massive Saturn and Mercury, but Mars as well. Again, this is like a deep change of mind and thought process here. And the other thing is that the second house represents like the inner circle, like family of origin and inner circle. So since Mercury represents things like friends, it could be that this paradigm shift that this person's going through is affecting the way they're talking with their inner circle. Like there might not be, like this person might just be going through this transformation and they may not be talking that much with their inner circle of family and friends. But I would think that with this deep inner transformation, that over time, it's like the inside's going to match the outside. So this inner transformation that's happening is going to start expressing in the outward world, probably first with friends here. And then you can see like Venus is going to be moving into the Leo second house here, and not to, in probably like a couple weeks, and then the Sun next month. So, and the moon's going to zip around in 2 weeks. So, within the next, few weeks here, next month at least, we're going to have this parade of planets going through Leo. And so, one by one, Mercury and then Venus and then Moon, Sun, all those planets are going to go through um, this aspect of this massive Saturn. So, there's going to be a deep change in the relationships of this person. So we're not only seeing it in like the Lagnatia going to the seventh house of relationships, but the second house here of inner circle. So what else did I write here? So, and this might also include like a change of friends, like if maybe part of this shift in paradigm includes, realizing that maybe certain people, like friends, for example, maybe certain friends are meant to move in a different direction on their own path, or maybe the dynamics of the relationships are going to shift. I could see all that here. There might also be strain on relationships, like especially the inner circle, because of this deep transformation. Usually, when people go through a deep transformation like this, they're not really interested in being social because it just takes so much mental, emotional, psychic energy to allow that deep, almost concrete, embedded paradigm to shift. Because sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Because sometimes you don't even recognize yourself anymore if you've been used to thinking and acting a certain way. So yeah, and then I have here also like This could also be like a contract, property contract or business going on here, as I mentioned with assets. And I also have here, like with this massive Saturn on the second house with Mercury and Mars, I could see this being like a kshatriya family, like a warrior caste family, not like caste in terms of, unfortunately, that's I think misconstrued sometimes in modern days. But the sort of original notion of caste system was just to sort of kind of know how certain groups of people thought. Like there's certain people who naturally just think of like as a warrior, like they're interested in defending and fighting, and other people are more interested in like studying and philosophizing. And it's not like one is better than the other, but they're just certain kind of like mental patterns that somebody has. So when I'm seeing Saturn and Mars with Mercury here, it's gonna be a very pragmatic, probably traditional family, but also fighting because again you have Purva Bhadrapada here and Magha and Krittika. So that's the kind of family line or kind of environment that this person grew up in. Yeah. Then the third house here, the third house lord is Mercury. Ketu's in Hasta. Hasta is a nakshatra symbolized by a hand. So Ketu and Hasta can be about grabbing things or letting them go. So this sort of churning process. And Jupiter is aspecting here. Jupiter's in Rohini. Rohini's it's sort of like a Aslesha, but kind of Rohini's never. I've never heard of Rohini being like negative. Even when negative planets are in Rohini, like the kind of more attractive qualities of those planets come through. Like when I see Saturn in Rohini, because Saturn could represent things like the earth and metals and stuff like that. Because Rohini is this like very attractive, like considered to be the most attractive, energy in terms of nakshatras. I typically see people who are interested in sculpting, using metals and earth and clay to create, beautiful structures. Um, so we have that there. And the third house can represent again non-oral communication, but also siblings. So this is somebody who I think is might be intermittently maybe sending out some texts or emails or trying to create like a maybe journaling on occasion to process some of this stuff, change that's going on. And then this could also be like siblings trying to handle or children finances in their own life. So that could all be going on. The fourth house here, the fourth house lord is Venus, and so Venus has gone to the first house here. So this is going to draw, Venus is going to draw fourth house energy into the first house. So, and the fourth house represents things like home and mother and happiness. So, again, it's kind of this cushy, cozy kind of energy being brought into the lugna. And again, the body, mind, totality of this person, if it was a person. And the fifth house here, the fifth house lord is Mars, and Mars is aspecting into its own sign. We also have Saturn and Jupiter here. So when we have again Saturn and Mars, that can be engineer. When we have Jupiter and Mars, we can get like lawyer. So this is somebody like their intellect is, and it's the house of intellect and counseling. So this is somebody who's thinking about developing deep transformation because Scorpio is a deep transformative type of energy of a rashi, a constellation. And then also like what kind of approach or action should be taken or constructed. I keep saying constructed because of Mars and Saturn to bring about fairness, because fairness, justice, and law comes from the Jupiter, um, or potentially even children. Yeah. The other thing is that Mars is not only what is that? Hold on here. Mars. Oh, I should write it the other way. Let me try to fix that. So Jupiter is both on Mars, the ruling planet of Scorpio, and it's on the house itself. So that's going to bring a lot of Jupiterian energy to the fifth house. So again, how do we create like a fair and equal system generally to whatever, whether it's children or engineering and that sort of thing. Okay, so then we'll move on to the other houses. Okay, so then all the stuff on the left is the same. On the right are notes, my notes for the other houses. So then if we look at the sixth house lord is the bhavat, bhavam, Jupiter. So the sixth house lord is going 6 houses away. So this is going to be like one kind of like, well, the sixth house represent enemies, but it also can represent things like debts and loans. So especially when we have, like I said, Mercury with Mars and Saturn in the second house of assets, this could be like contracts on properties. And then if we have Jupiter, Mars, Saturn all in the fifth house there, this could be like uh, construction contracts, engineering contracts, essentially. And so there might be, because of either work or side hustle that this person might have revolving real estate, which seems to be the case, that there would be like various loans and mortgages and like maybe revolving debt and or like refinancing potentially going on. And that's what I was saying for this chart, like even in this moment of time. Okay, so in the sixth house we have Jupiter is Lord and Mars aspecting here. And Mars is a planet representing enemies. So there can be some issues, I would say, with handling conflict with groups and others because, again, Jupiter has gone to the 11th house of groups and society. So that may be part of what's going on here since we're running Jupiter as a Antara sub-period of the Dasha. The seventh house here, the seventh house lord is this massive Saturn, which has gone to the second house from the seventh. So if we spun this chart to the seventh house or a Capricorn, that would give us a birth chart for the partner. And so their Lugnatia ruling planet would be going to the second house of, again, inner circle and assets. So it seems like there's, like a, how do you say, like a mirroring energy here going on. So the partner, if there was a partner involved here, would be very focused on, I would say, assets and or family. And they would also be from a potentially conservative family here. The other thing is that this massive Saturn in its own sign in the eighth house, usually when we have a, really strong planet in the eighth house, that can represent somebody who has a very different or alternative psychology. So even though this person comes from some seemingly very conservative background, they themselves are quite innovative. And I think because of this emotional, deep emotion and strong emotional kind of way of maneuvering and themselves through life and the world, is that is what's going to kind of differentiate themselves, I think, from, maybe the rest of their family or ancestors and, that sort of thing. So what did I write here? And also this Saturn is, trying to maintain, even though there's some rumbling going on in terms of a potential paradigm shift, the Saturn is also like, it's like concrete. So it's still trying to maintain this fixed air sign here. This is not something that's easy to kind of alter here. And that's the thing is, I've mentioned in my other videos with this massive Saturn in Aquarius, this is going to be kind of a rough few months. We've got about, I think, 8 or 9 months left of Saturn in this position, more or less. But the thing is that, this is a kind of shift, a deep seismic shift that is going to last until, 30 years, until Saturn comes back around 29, 30 years. It takes Saturn to go through the sky, zodiac. So, it may be tough, it might be painful, it might bring up anxiety or skepticism or what have you, but ultimately all of this is the universe moving in a you know uh, positive evolutionary tract. So um, that may help a bit. When you're in your tight moments, dealing with the how do I walk and talk and act now if I'm not working from the same paradigm? Because sometimes that just goes, a lot of times that goes on just automatic. And then you've got to rethink. It's almost like learning how to walk and talk and eat again, kind of thing. So, okay, so we're still in the seventh house here. So, yeah, I think the partner is probably trying to keep things together in terms of assets and family. Um, and they have an independent, but also I would say kind of a distant mind because of this Mercury Saturn. Uh, And the 7th Lord is gone. What did I write here? 7th Lord is gone. 8th house. Okay, so this distancing energy, that's what I was trying to remind myself about. So this distancing energy mentally is happening for both the native and their partner. But again, like, if we do spin this chart to the 7th house, then the sun is in their 7th house. So either way you look at it, there's a lot of energy going into partnerships and relationships. And it looks like these people, like if this was a couple here, they're quite supportive of each other on many levels. I mean, mental, emotional, spiritual, soul level. This is a very deep connection. I would even say, I mean, if you're into that kind of, thought or paradigm, like this is like really kind of like a twin flame type chart. If you're into that kind of thoughts about relationships and stuff. So, yeah, it's both of these people are all about finding their true north. And it looks like true north is each other. And the 8th house here is this massive SWA retrograde Saturn, and Mercury's, aspecting here. So again, all about reconfiguring thoughts and paradigms. And again, it looks like the partner's trying to contain some sort of upheaval in their family, birth family, or general family. I mean, the second house can eventually, as somebody gets older, represent all of their family. Then the 9th house here, we have the Lord is Jupiter. And we have Rahu in here in Uttara Bhadrapada. So this is like there's effort here, but I would say also kind of questioning energy. There's some because there's some distance here with Uttara Bhadrapada. Uttara Bhadrapada are the back legs of a funeral pyre. So there's this kind of what I say, like there's this kind of a destruction energy, like Purva Bhadrapada, but it's more like a conscious release. And so with Rahu here, there's effort there, but there's also like this kind of alternative kind of thought process. So again, in the 9th house represents a guru. So if we get back to teachers again and religion, so if this person was on the religious side, which looks like they might be looking for somebody who had kind of a more alternative spin on something, some kind of religion that was more, I'd say, like a detached spirituality rather than like a bhakti, like a bhakti yoga type of more emotional type, potentially. But again, it can swing both ways with this kind of person because they're so emotional but so intellectual simultaneously. And because they're going through this change, like there might also be this change in terms of maybe the Rahu here is symbolizing like somebody seeking spiritual answers to help them understand what they're going through. Because again, I think the general consciousness of people, most people be like, oh, just go on vacation or, go find a hobby or something like that when there's a much deeper spiritual transformation or ascension going on here. Yeah, so that's what that Rahu, I think, is like bringing question. I put questioning authority, but I think it's more like bringing questions to authority, like helping, looking for some sort of um, spiritual authority or religious authority who can help them understand what the process that they're going through. Yeah. So then the 10th house here, the 10th house lord is Mars, which again is in that Krittika energy. So it's kind of an explosive energy. And then we have this massive Saturn aspecting here, and Saturn is debilitated in Aries. So I would say like there's a lot of disruption and fighting at work, or at least a 9 to 5 job. Then the 11th house, the Lord is Venus, Jupiter is there in Rohini, and Mars is there in Krittika. Um, so this could be again like I think a dualness. I think there's a shift going on in terms of like the way somebody socializes or who they socialize with. Because once they go through a deep, transformational process like this, even if they're people they've had in their life, their whole, people they've had, they've known throughout their lives, and there's been no nastiness or something to drive the relationship apart. But sometimes, when you go through these deep transformations, you just don't energetically vibe with somebody anymore. And it's nothing personal. It's just that the journey itself will shift your energy. And again, if this person's looking for their true north, this person, especially because we keep seeing sun, sun, sun. So, like, this person is looking for their soul path here, not just looking for a hobby. They're looking for purpose in their life, which is a much deeper transformation. And so when you go through that sort of thing, again, it's very energetically taxing. At least that's what I found it to be. And that's what I hear other people saying. And, they don't really have the energy to socialize much or go out much the way most people do. Um, they can be, sort of hermit-like or introverted at least, trying to kind of just energetically allow the shifts to happen and maybe process them if they're trying to understand them. Yeah, and so I think with this 11th house here, there's some attempt to socialize, but it might kind of, it's kind of hit or miss because there's this transformation going on. And this is somebody who's not, I think, going to follow a social convention. Um, yeah, so, and then we see that Mars is on Jupiter here. So, yeah, there's this kind of goodwill but contentious energy. And then again, the base here, the Lord is this Venus and Aslesha. So there's some attraction to socializing, but it may not stick because again, if somebody's in great flux internally, energetically, um, they may not just be up for it, or they try, and then it just, after like half an hour, they're ready to go home. Like, I just want to go watch a movie or something. Because it doesn't seem to be, they don't really seem to be connecting with people. That's because their energy's in flux. So then the 12th house here, the 12th house lord is Mercury. And so, this would potentially be some thoughts about, losses through speech and decisions and maybe the ancestral line, all the things that Mercury is representing here. So there might be some concern about, because again, this massive Saturn is in the 8th house of deep psychology. There could be some thoughts about, um, concerns about like losses and stuff like that, especially if somebody's not feeling like their old selves, like maybe they were just very, they could push through anything, it was kind of like a mind over matter type thing, which I could potentially see here. But if they're allowing that paradigm to drop, if they're dropping a paradigm of like, oh, I have to muscle my way through life and, work super hard and just bulldoze my way through life, and if they're shifting into more of an emotional feeling type energy, um, then they might worry about, well, if I'm not pushing the way I used to, is everything going to fall apart? That kind of thing. So, okay, so that's a chart. So let's look at the subcharts now for this moment in time. Okay, so let's take a look at the subzodiacs, amshas, subdivisional charts, all different names for the same thing. So these charts are mostly used for timing. They're usually not analyzed, by themselves, but they can give some added detail or nuance to the main birth chart, the natal chart. So let's take a look. So the first slide is about relationships. The top chart is the Navamsha D9 for spouse and partnerships. And the second chart is the Drake and a D3 for siblings. So just as a reminder, since we're talking about timing here, is that the current Dasha period for the full moon is Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury. And then on August 17th, it's going to switch to Sun, Mercury. Okay, so I've circled the planets of Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury. So you can start to see like where the energy is shifting and how it's shifting through these different sub facets of somebody's life. All right, so the Navamsha D9 of the 4 planets, Saturn is not well placed. It's in the 8th house, and it's with K2, and there's also Mars aspecting it. So there's 2 malefics with a malefic. And the thing is that Saturn again is in the 8th house, somewhat similar to the natal chart. So, and these 3 planets can all be about kind of delays and separation and actually deconstruction, I would say, because Saturn and Mars can be about construction, And then with Ketu there, that can give like a twist or turn to all that. The other thing is that the Saturn is aspecting into the second house again, where there's Rahu. So there might be delays in communication as well. What else do we have here? We do have some strong planets. We have like a Swa sun in its own sign in the 11th house. We have Mercury in the 7th house. We have Jupiter in the 9th house. So sun, the 11th house is about secular groups and clubs, and the 7th house is about partnerships, and the 9th house is about spiritual community. So 3 of the 4 planets are in social houses here. So there is something about socializing. So at least the partner might be more involved with that. And then again, Saturn here, let's see. Saturn here is the lord of the 4th house of home, and it's also the lord of the 5th house of children. So there might be some, I would say, and the other thing is Saturn aspects into its own sign. So you get Saturn and Aquarius again in the 5th house. So then you have 3 malefics on the 5th house here. So again, it looks like spouse, there's some involvement with groups, but it's kind of about containment here, because there is in the deep psychology some disturbances going on. Let's see. We do also have Venus and Jupiter in the 3rd house. That can give communication, more nonverbal communication, but there might, even though Venus and Jupiter are benefics, Jupiter is the sole enemy of Venus. We only use that concept in Amsha analysis, not the natal chart analysis. But it looks like there might be some tense nonverbal communication going on here. Let's see what else. And then also in the 5th house, besides Moon, Mars, Saturn aspecting its own sign, we have Jupiter aspecting there and Sun as well. So we have 5 planets in the 5th house, and let's see, Sun and Mars, leadership planets, Mars and Saturn, engineering again, Mars and Jupiter, a lawyer. So I could see this being like a lead engineer type person. And again, this energy isn't too dissimilar from the main chart. So it might be that the partner or business partners are, kind of experiencing again similar things because of the mirroring we saw in the natal chart. But once we move into Sun, Mercury, both of those planets are well placed. So it seems like things should be improving, in about a month from now for a partner. Then in the Drake and a D3, Saturn is not well placed again, and you'll see that continually. It is exalted. Being exalted gives it some strength, which tends to help in the Amshas. We have Sun as karako bhavanasha in the 9th house. So Sun in the 9th house can give difficulties with father and authority. And, so this was actually and then we have Rahu here as well. And that kind of reminded me again of that Rahu in the 9th house for the natal chart of, bringing questions to authority or questioning authority, that kind of thing. Then what else do we have here? Mars is aspecting Mercury. That's going to bring Mercury down because Mars is sole enemy of Mercury. So, and Mercury's in the 10th house here of work. So this can bring some challenge to thoughts, communication, friends, working relationships here. Saturn, let's see. Saturn is also aspecting 10 houses away onto Sun, and it's also a soul enemy. So we've got a couple of soul enemy relationships here. So there's some, contentious energy going on, and three of the 4 planets that involve the soul enemy are, currently active through Dasha. Let's see, Jupiter's aspecting its own sign in the 5th house. So there is some wise or emotional, spiritual counseling available here in this moment. What else we have? We have a parivartana exchange of houses between Mercury and, not Mercury, Venus and Mars. So those are 2 passionate planets. So there's going to be quite a bit of passion for siblings here. And again, once we move into Sun, Mercury, those are 2 positively placed planets, even though they both have their soul enemies on them. So things should get better, but again, there's some tension here. Yeah. And again, for siblings, it looks like it's mostly work and authority energy here for them. So that may be part of why they're absent from the natal chart. Remember, K2 was in the third house. So it may be that the siblings focused on work and problems with authorities. It could also be, again, father or religion, possibly here for the sibling. Then this second slide here, this is more relationships. The top chart is Saptamsha D7 for children, and the second chart is Dwadashamsha D12 for parents and grandparents. So in the first chart, Sun and Mercury are not well placed. Especially since we're moving into Sun-Mercury period in August, things may get a little bit worse as far as kids are concerned. Let's say there's issues or losses here, in leading mind, emotion, authorities, because you have the Sun aspecting both the Moon and Mercury. So the two mind planets, and Moon is emotional, Mercury is analytical. And Sun is aspecting its own sign. So I think there's some protection here. But also, again, we've got Sun and Mercury in houses of enemies and losses. So there can be some, which, again, in the natal chart, we saw Jupiter with Mars and Saturn. So again, it was like there seemed to be this energy of like trying to protect children from losses and injuries in the first, in the main chart. Saturn here is in the fifth house of, counseling and children as well. And at least Jupiter is well placed in its own sign in the Lagna, so there might be a positive point in this current Dasha period. But once we move to Sun Mercury, again, things might get a little bit more challenging here. And what else did I write here? Oh, the other thing is Saturn is aspecting the seventh house, the 11th house, and the second house here. So, which are three, again, relationship houses here. So there could be problems, with relationships. Again, some either with children or the children on their own are having. Then the Dwadashamsha D12. This is for parents, grandparents. All the planets are well placed here, which again in the main chart, we had nothing aspecting the fourth house, but we had that Venus and Aslesha going to the first. So it went to a positive house. So I wasn't seeing too much difficulty with home necessarily, or and mom. And so here again, the planets are well placed. We do have a Saraswati yoga here with the placement of Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury. So this education and creativity. Venus and Moon have Digbala, so there's strength here, which again, in the main chart, there was strength with Venus and Moon and being on the 1-7 axis in terms of emotional uh, capacity. So it looks like parents and grandparents, that's part of the family line, is this kind of emotional nature. And then Jupiter is Swan, the second house. So again, a very kind of philosophical family. And what else we have here? Okay, so we have Saturn, Jupiter aspecting the 10th house where Sun and Mercury are. And we have Saturn aspecting that same house. So Saturn, again, is a sole enemy of Sun, and Jupiter and Mercury are there. So there's a lot of like education and communication going on here. There's a debilitated Mars in the 9th house. So again, that might be like kind of questioning authority again. But overall, the family line seems to be quite creative and emotional, and issues with authority. So that seems to be, again, longstanding, not just with the native. And that gets back to that, like Mercury and Magha and the Swa retrograde Saturn, in terms of old paradigms that are even like generational paradigms, not just personal paradigms that are, shifting and changing. So once they move into the Sun-Mercury period, I think there's going to be less tension because you won't have Jupiter and Saturn on Sun and Mercury. And again, Jupiter and Saturn are very different energies, so it's going to be a little, even that will create some tension. But there'll be less tension and more clarity in terms of emotional leadership moving forward with parents and grandparents in terms of their contribution to the situation at hand. Okay, then if we look at education and career, this top chart is Sadamsha D24 for education, and the second chart is the Jashamsha D10 for career. Excuse me. So you can see in the education category here, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury are not well placed. However, Mercury is swa, so that's going to be strong. And you do have Jupiter aspecting into its own sign in the 12th house, so that's going to be some protective energy for losses. Yeah, and so Mercury and Jupiter are the two education planets, Saturn's delays. Sun is in a positive house, but it's debilitated. However, when it aspects the lugna, it's going to be exalted there. So there's some protection overall for education, and protection, even though there might be some temporary issues or temporary losses going on here, there's some protection from that. But also, what I'm seeing here is that part of the education, because again, the two education planets are here in the sixth house of enemies and acute issues, and Venus is there. So this is relationships and Saturn. So I could even see this as being education, part of the educational process, how to deal with disappointment in relationships. So not necessarily formal education, so to speak, but what this person may be learning. And again, this fits with that kind of emotional, Venus and Moon on the 1-7 axis with partnership. And the Dashamsha D10 for career. Mercury's not well placed, but the dispositor of Sun is exalted, so that brings some strength to Mercury. The thing though is that there's a lot going on the 5-11 axis here. Sun is exalted, but with Rahu, and then you have Saturn exalted in the 5th house with Ketu and Moon, and Mars is aspecting here. So actually, with Saturn, you have 1, 2, 3 malefic planets on Saturn, and yeah, you've got 2 malefic planets on Sun. So even though they're positively placed, there's still going to be a lot of tension here. And Sun represents authority, boss, and Saturn represents employees. So I could just see this being like ongoing issues and even mental health issues because there's Ketu and Rahu with the moon. Ketu and Rahu by themselves can indicate mental health issues, but then when you get the moon and these malefics here, I would see this being an ongoing problem. The other thing is that all these malefics in the 5th house, this could be like not much good advice or bad advice even affecting work and income. Because the 11th house represents income. And there is this drive towards the 11th house, like you have this exalted sun, and you have Rahu here. There's a lot of push towards the 11th house of income. But, navigating this uh, boss-employee relationship dynamic may be quite difficult without much good advice as to how to actually uh, move up the ranks, move up the ladder. So, yeah. And again, we saw that Saturn debilitated in the 10th house in the main chart, so this isn't too surprising. Then we've got some wealth charts here. So the first chart at the top is Rudramsha D11 for income, and the second chart is the Chatratamsha D4 for assets. And let's see, so Saturn is not well placed in this first chart. Again, we see like Saturn again, it keeps ending up more often than not in negative houses. So, Saturn's really creating quite a drag in many ways. And the other thing we keep seeing is Saturn keeps aspecting Mercury like it does in the main chart. And you can see both here in the D11 and the D4, Saturn is aspecting Mercury. So there's some, drag or change potentially in the mind along these in these categories of life as well. So the other thing is Mercury is aspected by Jupiter and Venus, two benefics, and the Sun is with the Moon. So when we switch to Sun Mercury, you're going to have the benefics on these planets. You do have Saturn as well, but that's going to uphold both the mind, Mercury the mind, and Moon the mind, as well as the spirit and the soul. And then again, this Mercury, Venus, Jupiter in the 11th house, that's going to be pretty good for income. And Saturn, even though it's this massive retrograde Saturn, in this subchart, Saturn is Lord of the second house, so Saturn's going to aspect its own. So I think overall income should be pretty good. There might be some ups and downs a bit, but overall should be pretty good. But also, like it looks like it's a pretty emotional situation here because you do have, the moon with the sun and Venus on Mercury. So I think one of the ways, and the other thing is Venus and Jupiter are also the counseling planets. So one of the ways that this person would potentially derive income is through counseling, emotional counseling of some kind, and maybe like not necessarily therapist, but maybe like HR, which would make sense with the D10, like the career subchart, because maybe that's the job is like to, mediate problems between bosses and employees. That could be. Um, and that would also make sense with the main chart because if there's a lot of kind of engineering thoughts and that sort of thing, but a very emotional person, then that's the kind of person with that dual nature. They could talk to both sides of the, like in a manufacturing situation, like they can talk nuts and bolts with the manufacturing, administration side and finance, and then they can talk more like emotional outcomes with employees and stuff like that. But basically, when we move to Sun and Mercury, the income should improve as well. And then Chatur D4, all the grahas are well placed. And again, we can see here, again, we've got Saturn and Mars energy in the second house of assets, and Jupiter there as well. So again, I was thinking like a transformation of properties or refinancing properties, that kind of thing. Yeah, so this pretty much is similar to the main chart here. Then this slide is health amsha. So at the top we have Tajik Shashtamsha D6 for acute issues, Tajik Ashtamamsha D8 for chronic issues, and the Bamsha D27 for strength and resilience. So in the top chart here, all the grahas are well placed, so that's pretty nice. The thing though is that this is a Saturn-dominated chart. You can see Saturn is on Sun and Moon. It's also the lord of Jupiter, Venus, Rahu, Ketu. So 6 planets. Saturn is, basically influencing quite strongly. That's going to create a lot of drag. The other thing is Saturn is on Sun, and Saturn is the soul enemy's sun. And Saturn is on the Moon. So I would say delays and obstacles with general health, but also mental, physical, emotional as well. Yeah, so again, overall it would be, good, okay at least. But you can see that even though even though it doesn't initially look like they're, massive acute issues, you can see that there's chronic issues here to some extent. So then the second chart here, Tajik Ashtamamsha D8 for chronic issues. We have Gotama Lagna, so that means this chart is important. So and what do we see here? Well, we have Saturn in her negative house again, and we have Saturn and Mercury mutually aspecting each other. Mercury, and also we have Rahu and Ketu on this axis. So, how do we change our mental structures, habits, attitudes, and again, what potential gains or losses here, or how do we mitigate losses? And it looks like, especially since Saturn is in the 12th house of also isolated places, besides it being a house of expenditures and losses, we have Mercury aspecting its own sign here of Gemini. And when I see this kind of combination, I immediately start thinking about like meditation and retreat, that kind of thing. So it seems like this person, at least in this moment, again, if we're talking about a person, has acute issues. We've got the 6th house situation and the 12th house is like they're taking time apart. Again, there was not much indication of communication or kind of intermittent socializing and stuff like that in the main chart. And then again, we're seeing here that this person is probably taking a step back. The other thing is that we do have Jupiter aspecting Mercury, Rahu, Ketu, so this could be like an unusual kind of education or communication or spiritualization of education. But I was seeing because Jupiter is aspecting its own sign, you can see that there's some protection here and losses and acute issues. Then the bomb should be a D27 for strength and resilience. All the planets are well placed. That's great. There's a parivartana between Mars and Jupiter. That's going to bring a lot of enthusiasm and inspired action to this person, which makes sense. But then if you look at the 1-7 axis here, you've got Moon, Jupiter, Venus, Sun, Mercury. So you've got 5 planets on the 1-7 axis, including Sun, Venus, Moon, like the natal chart. Then with the parivartana, you can switch Mars and Jupiter, so you get like another planet, that's 6, and then Saturn aspect. So basically, you have 7 planets out of 9 have their energy involved with the 7th house of relationships and independent business. And among all that, Venus is in its own sign. So Venus, an emotional planet, is very strong. You have Moon aspecting here. Moon is exalted in Taurus. So the two of the 7, so again, there's all this energy, all this focus, 7 planets on or in the 7th house, and the 2 strongest planets are the 2 emotional planets. So again, if we're getting back to strength and resilience, this emotional capacity, emotional intelligence of this person is really quite outstanding. And this is what keeps this person going. Like even when there's mental struggles or challenges or whatever, that's what's, if they follow that and take care of that, then they stay on a good road for themselves, essentially. Um, then again, with all these planets, especially the 2 really strong emotional planets in the 7th house, this is all about being resilient, but also finding your way and feeling your way to the best path forward. So that's like almost like a superpower in this chart. Okay, then the last slide here, we've got spirituality and worship. So the top chart is Panchamsha D5 for innate spirituality, and the second chart's the Vimshamsha D20 for formal worship. In the first chart, Sun and Saturn are not well placed. This is also another Saturn-dominated chart. You got Saturn on Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, and then it's the Lord of Rahu and Moon, so it's influencing quite strongly. Oh, it's also on Sun and Ketu, so it's influencing all the planets except Venus, and Venus is debilitated. So I would say this is like a fairly challenged chart, at least in this moment. Then when you move to, let's see, but this might also bring like discipline and learning, I would say, because you have Saturn on Jupiter and Mercury in the 5th house, which could be like mantra, chanting mantras, tantra, yantra, that sort of thing. So I think that there's discipline here, but with all this Saturnian energy, and then you've got Mars and Rahu on the moon, and you've got Saturn on the Mercury and Venus debilitated. I think there's some discipline here. I'm just not seeing a lot of enjoyment. And I'm seeing this being kind of a drag and maybe a lonely thing. So this is not something that somebody would, seems very enjoyable to like this person. Um, yeah, and then you've got 3 malefics on the moon. You've got Rahu, Sun, and Mars. So that's a lot of, mental challenge, I would say, emotional challenge. So I'm just not seeing this being again like a fun or enjoyable way for somebody to express their spirituality, just doing their own thing. However, in contrast, if we look to the Vimshamsha D20 for formal worship, Saturn and Mercury are not well placed again. So we keep seeing Saturn, in negative houses, and then Saturn's aspecting Mercury again. So there's this, again, switching or reshuffling of mental processes here. But we'll look at it. What else we have? We have a Swa Jupiter, we have a exalted Venus, and we have a Swa Moon. So 3 benefics, all very strong here. So, and Jupiter Swa in the 2nd house of oral communication. Venus is exalted in the 5th house of counseling, and Moon is Swa in the 9th house of religion and guru and satsang, spiritual community. So there's, if this person hooks up, or it looks like they would hook up, but connect with, some kind of spiritual community, it looks like when they do, they're going to derive a lot of good from it, like good conversations, good counseling, um, spiritual community. Um, yeah, it looks like for this person, some sort of formal institution or, religious or spiritual institution would be quite supportive for them. And the other thing is like, we've got Mercury aspecting Moon and Sun in the ninth house here. So mind and emotions and soul all aligned here very strongly. Again, in sort of like a Cancerian, in Cancer. So, yeah, I just see there being a lot of good for this person in a formal setting. Okay, so that's the full moon coming up this weekend. As always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by and listening to one of my talks. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. And if you're looking for more birth charts to check out and learn from, I have a birth charts archive list 2024 video where I have a list of all the charts I've analyzed on the channel and the videos you can find them in. I do offer individual birth chart readings. I do those live on Zoom and as recorded video. If that's interesting to you, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more info. I do have another YouTube channel, Natural Medicine, that covers Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, and yoga, so other Vedic arts, as well as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine, so other paradigms of natural medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care. So that's out there too, if that's helpful to you. So, as always, I hope you found this talk interesting, helpful, and useful to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take care. Namaste.